Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the third webinar of the series. Today, we're discussing strategic PPA management, aligning the legal and regulatory and market dynamics for optimal outcomes. Bring that together with a little bit of practical guidance when it comes to creating PPAs that work for your organization. I am joined once again by Dan Tennakoon of RE24. I'm Andrew Brisbin. I'll be moderating today. And Dan, give us a little context of the scenario. Are we ready to dive into this conversation today?
Yeah, we are really looking forward to go to some of the deep dive aspects of the PPA management. I mean, as you're rightly saying, we look at the high level overview of the regulatory aspect and the legal aspect, and now we have now we need to look at how it looks like from the operational angle. How do you do that management?
Yeah, I agree. And I think the key part here is that we're taking all the different perspectives when it comes to the strategic side, bringing it into a practical, tangible standpoint, and hopefully getting people really comfortable with understanding how the PPA works for them when they're thinking about all the changing factors that are happening in the environment. And there's a lot of uncertainty in the world. And if you could structure PPAs correctly, you can really maximize the benefit for all parties, really in creating a tool that is able to navigate some of these changing dynamics in the world, whether they be regulatory, whether they be financial, whether they be, actually even environmental. If something happens to a project, we're going to talk about those different things. So diving right in, let's set the scene and say, you know, I'm I have signed a PPA. I'm in a position where I'm saying, hey, it's going to come live in June, and something goes wrong, right? I can't get the resources that I need or the supply of energy that I need. Talk us through some of the legal remedies that you'd see in trying to navigate this situation, and let's take it from both sides, because the reality is that we want all parties to benefit from this. So if we were to start from like maybe the developer side, if there's an issue at the developer, what are the remedies that someone who's engaged in a PPA can expect in this situation?
Fantastic. Such a great question, Andrew. And also it can be very broad as well. Let me go into one angle then, and I'll stop there, and let's see whether we can elaborate it further from there.
Mm.
Yes. So from the developer angle, so the developer signed a PPA, and they're really looking forward to get that live. It's really important for them because when it goes live, that's when they get revenue. So it's fundamentally important for us to get that going. But also from a buyer side, they are so much eagerly waiting until the PPA goes live. What could cause some of those projects to get delayed? One of the fundamental reasons to get it delayed is that because these are construction projects, heavy construction, and there will be so many interlinked things, a lot of things on critical path. And then if one of those supply chain issues, equipment delivery, if those things get delayed, and then the whole projects get delayed. So when those things get delayed, contractually, there are provisions available for the buyer to have security around that delays. So there are delay damages where the developer or the seller has to oblige to the buyer, and typically those things are measured in a euro or pounds per kilowatt per day. So what we're measuring is that we're looking at by each day when the project get delayed, and then the buyer get compensated. So that's a nice contractual remedy available for the buyer, but also because you're looking at the seller side from the developer side. From the seller side, it's in their best interest to get the project live up and running ASAP, but those things could happen. So they want to make sure that delay damages aren't really costing them an arm and a leg. So that's all negotiation process happening at the beginning when we sign the PPA. But
Mm.
also those delay damages are typically capped at a certain level for a
Not going to become infinitely rich.
infinite. Exactly. So it could be 3 months, it could be 100 days, 120 days, something like that. So parties would agree and negotiate how much that delay damages, and then how much that cap would be.
When you're thinking about that, like that situation where the cap is in place, Are there situations in which, if they get to the cap, that they might decide to terminate the project? Is that typically where you'd see that kind of inflection point where somebody's saying, "Oh, hey, we've actually been delayed, let's say 3 months. We're at the cap now." Is that usually an inflection point for people to consider, more drastic measures?
Yeah, contractual those things are managed in number of different ways. So we have the commercial operation date for the PPA, so that COD, and then we have a long stop date for the COD as well.
The
I mean, what's the maximum amount of time that you can let this project to slip as such? So the long stop date. And if you don't meet the project on the long stop date, so the delay damages are paid until that moment, but also capped up to a certain number of days. And the project doesn't meet on that go live, meet COD, commercial operation date, on that long stop date. So then the project can get terminated. So when the projects get terminated, again there are, before it gets terminated, there are remedies available for the seller,
Mhm.
because you're talking about the developer angle. So the
Yeah.
developer can find alternative projects to replace this one from the same generation capacity, from the same output, from the same price point.
Mhm.
So that's one remedy available. But also, if that remedy is exhaust, and then the projects come into a termination, and when that termination happens, there will be a termination payment. Or yes, so the termination payment, again, parties negotiate and agree what could be that termination payment is. So that's the pre-COD liability cap,
Right.
because the project hasn't met the COD yet.
Mm.
So the pre-COD liability cap, or the pre-COD termination, and then that's the ultimate exposure that the developer would be having if this project is terminated before that
Mm.
time. But
Makes
but
a lot of sense.
yeah, but just to close that off, like, obviously nobody wants to be in that position, because from the buyer, they have been so much looking forward to get the project online, and then from the seller, they have been looking forward to get that online as well.
Mm.
And if you think of all the transaction costs the parties have been spent on that one, or the time and effort they have been spent on, they spent on quite significant amount amount of effort and time and money. So nobody wants to get to that situation. But as we say, there could be a doomsday scenario, and we have these measures in case if there's a doomsday scenario.
Mm-mm-mm. Yeah, ultimately, right, it is not in anyone's interest to go that way because it's just a costly endeavor that just wastes everyone's time.
Absolutely, yeah.
No, that's grim. Well, let's avoid those scenarios. And then let's talk about it from a maybe from a purchaser standpoint. What kind of things could happen that maybe are maybe affected by the grid, right? Outside of the control of the developer, right? Let's leave the developer behind now and say that you as the buyer are sitting there, and for whatever reason your project can't go live, and it's not the developer's fault. What do you do in those circumstances? Because it's pretty straightforward when the developer has, an issue that they're obliged to fix. What happens in other situations?
Yeah. And sometimes a lot of those things comes into the really basic, like fundamental
Mm,
stakeholder management or fundamental communication as such. Because if you are the buyer, if the seller doesn't communicate to you, if the developer doesn't communicate to you what's happening on the project, you don't know anything. You are complete in darkness. So
yeah.
you really don't know whether it's a grid delay or whether there's a delay in construction. So you need to have that visibility from the developer, from the seller, on what's happening on the ground.
Hmm.
And if it is a grid delay, as we were saying, so then unfortunately the seller has no control of the grid delay. So we are talking about any of the distribution network operator, any of the DNO delays, any of the transmission network operator delays, any of
Hmm.
the connection delays. With Unfortunately, whether you're talking about UK, EU, it's common, because those things are out of your control. And when those things happen, contractually, what we do is that they are called relief events.
Mm,
Essentially, the seller is relieved. The seller has a relief from those circumstances. So each day when the project gets extended because of that relief event, and then the project COD long stop date, so commercial operation date, long stop date, get extended. So in other
Okay.
words, we expect the project to be 30th of June, and then there will be some delays for 2 months. So then we are saying that June 30th get further 2 months extended. And on those scenarios, unfortunately, from the seller's angle, even though they would love to get compensation on this one because they are actually out of pocket because the project hasn't gone live, because it's a matter which is outside the control of the generator or the seller, the buyer in that scenario can't get compensated.
Mm.
And
So
in
the
a way,
buyer is in a situation where they're going to have to find alternative power sources if they need to go live
if they know to be
in
live,
that temporary
yes.
situation.
Yeah. I mean, usually because it's all regulated markets, there's no concern of the power as such because naturally like power comes. It's about that green credentials that they want to maintain. It's about the additional requirement that they want to go for. So that's a challenge. But
Okay.
also we shouldn't forget about the seller as well. Because if you think of the seller, if you are the seller, right? So you build this massive wind farm or you build this massive solar farm, and then how much of millions of pounds, euros, or dollars that's sunk in there. So literally what you're saying is that there's like acres and acres of solar farm sitting there doing nothing. And
The
yeah,
worst.
so yes, and from the seller's angle as well, that's a very sad story because they want to sell this power. Unfortunately, they can't sell the power because they don't have the grid connection. So I think it's actually from both parties, those relief events, it makes sense to happen like both parties bear their own cost as
Mm.
such, but then neither party pays compensation to each other.
Earlier you were saying that this is a common occurrence, and I think I heard the other day that somebody was saying that they're buying new connections 5 years from now, right? So we're talking long-term horizons here where people need to be thinking about these things on a regular basis because we're looking at many years out at this point as opposed to, oh, I'll hook up something next week.
Yeah, exactly. So the grid connection could be many years ahead. And if you look at the typical PPA, so those ones would contracted typically 18 months, 24 months from the connection date. So it's not typically you'd have a PPA signed 5 years ahead of it goes live.
Yeah.
So things like the offshore wind could be the scenario, but
Yeah.
typically on the any um, onshore wind or ground mount solar, 18 to 24 months is a classic timeline.
One of the things that I think this plays to is towards that idea of additionality, right? Because a lot of people are thinking about projects that are somewhat new capacity. So, how does the additionality concept play into the timing of PPAs? Because if you're saying, hey, I think obviously the developer is aware that new connections take time, and so they've planned that out into their build situation, right? So they're adding new assets to the grid and they're generating new power. That PPA that you just described is then negotiated in anticipation that it comes live COD, you said 18 to 24 months roughly?
Correct. Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great. So typically they're in the process of finishing out their build when it comes to the generators.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the challenges that the generator or the PPA is having it with if it is additional project or it's operational project, it's a completely two different beast as such. Because
Mm,
if you look at the additional project, which is new to grid, brand new project, so it has all this grid connection. It has to go through the planning to get the consents, and then discharge of planning conditions, and then have the grid get it energized. So all the challenges has to be the challenges are there.
mm.
So the classic reason to delay is that it's nothing like the force majeure events, not like act of God events, not the floods, and then all the natural disasters.
COVID, etc.
But typically the grid delays is a classic reason for those projects to get delayed. But when you look at the operational projects, their challenge is slightly different because operational projects are already operational, they have been energized, and they produce power. So those projects, if it is meant to go on 1st of June 2024, and if it doesn't happen on 1st of June, and that's mainly because all the industry switching of the industry, like because if you underneath the PPA, there are so many parties works under the PPA in order to get that energy shift across. If it's a virtual PPA, there is a route to market provider. If it is a physical PPA, there's a balancing and shaping provider, and there are meter operators, because you need to have all this meter data comes in there, and not all of them could switch at the same time.
Right.
And if you don't have them switch at the same time, so that could cause delays as well.
So if those individuals, right, those parties that are operating under it, right, this goes to the question around like the operating projects. For those people who are doing the delivering towards that PPA, do they count towards I guess costs for the supplier, right? If they're providers of the metering and the costing and shaping, they don't actually make the shift in time. Is that a cost that's typically borne by one party or the other? Or are we seeing that getting negotiated in the PPA?
No, so typically those things are, if those things are managed from the generator's angle, in most cases, that's what happens with the route to market provider, the meter switching. So then it's actually generator's obligation to make it happen. So then typically what happens is that the project meant to go on 1st of June, and then let's say it goes live on 22nd of June, for the argument's sake. So from 1st of June to 22nd of June, whatever that difference, that the impact the project would have, it's typically the seller bears that cost, because they were meant to have that go live from 1st of June.
And so you're referring to the spread then.
Yes. Yeah.
Right.
And yeah.
Very good. Cool. Great. Okay. Well, let's take it to the doomsday scenario then. What happens if the PPA gets terminated? What are the scenarios there that you find, or the remedies that you would have in that situation? Because we've talked about, oh, things are okay and resolvable. Let's go to the end of the world. What
Yeah.
now?
Yeah. And as well, so if the term PPA gets terminated, before the final termination kicks in, typically the seller would have options to come with a replacement PPA, as you say. So let's say if they can't come up with a replacement PPA, and then what we do is that in most contracts, we look at how much would be the replacement cost of a PPA. So if the buyer is planning to get a new PPA right now for the remainder of the term, how much that PPA would cost, and then what are the admin charges of getting that PPA across the line, or the transaction charges and so on, and then what would be the additional electricity or the renewable attributes cost that the buyer has to bear that as well. So all of that forms part of the cost basis for the seller, if it is on seller's default. But sometimes the PPA could get terminated if it is because of a buyer default as well. Yeah, and then so the buyer default typically comes after the PPA goes live. So maybe let's focus on before
On the
PPA goes
supplier
live.
side, when you're thinking about the supplier side, so is that typically done in a formulaic fashion? So you would say that, when we're thinking about the like in scoping out the termination clause of a PPA, that you would outline those pieces of the formula that you just mentioned there, the cost of change, the
Yeah,
transaction costs, and these kind of things. That would all be in the PPA already, correct?
in the PPA already, yes, correct. But then it's really important to understand that if it is a additional project, it's a new to grid project, you would see two termination payments. Typically, so you'd have a pre-COD termination payment, and then you have a post-COD termination payment.
Okay.
And the post-termination COD payment, it's common whether it's an additional project or whether it's an existing operational project. But the pre-COD termination payment is unique for the new to grid addition to projects. Yes. So there's a formula of calculating it, and then in the PPS, in most cases, what you have is that you have a lump sum number saying that what that number is. But then when we negotiate and agree the PPA, so there's a whole formula behind how it's been derived and what's been agreed.
Right.
But that's, can I just go articulate a bit more on that? Because that's actually really interesting, because if you look at that pre-COD termination payment, from a buyer's point of view, all buyer wants to have is that PPA goes live. So they want to have that termination payment at the highest level, because they want to say that, Mr. Generator, you want to do this PPA, we agreed, right? Now it's for you to deliver. I have nothing to do with your delivery. So get it delivered. If you're not delivering it, here's a compensation. And then it should be big enough for you to have that drive to get it delivered.
Naturally. Makes sense.
Naturally. But if you flip the coin, if you look at the other side from the generator side angle, so the generator, obviously generator doesn't want to terminate it. But there could be instance that doomsday, worst come to worst happens, there's nothing there just to terminate it. Then if you look at from the generator's angle, so they also went through all their investment rounds, all their funders, approvals, everybody. So they were hoping for this long-term project that they make contracted revenue for this project. And all of a sudden, that project is no longer there. So not just the project is no longer there, but actually you have to pay a hefty termination payment as well. So it's a completely different extreme of the mindset you're trying to tackle here. From the seller's angle, you're thinking of like hundreds of thousands of pounds or the euros. And from the buyer's angle, you're thinking of like millions of pounds or the euros.
But it's not even just that, right? Because like let's say it's not even a question of the project not going live. There could be a situation in which the macroeconomic factors of the PPA that they agreed have gone completely in a different direction, right? We could be talking about a different price point where we see, the change from, I don't know, an energy crisis in the UK, which we've recently seen, right? Where the prices change drastically and different rates can be agreed at different points. So in some instances, if there is a math equation here, the being locked in at a certain price could be very detrimental to the profitability of that project, right?
100%, absolutely. I mean, if you seen some of the examples, so there were some US offshore wind projects which was subsidized on an agreed offtake rate,
Mm.
and some of these huge offshore wind farms pull out from those projects and then paid penalties as well, because all exactly as you're saying, all that macroeconomic changes, all of a sudden there's huge inflation, huge interest rates, and then it was no longer viable to do those projects. So then from a generator's angle, it's actually better to pull it out from
And
the
turn
country.
off the turbines even.
Exactly. And pull it out rather than having that contract long term over 10 years, because then you are having that suffering over 10-year period. If you pull it out, because then on the outset you are meant to do the project in like X million dollars, but you
Yeah.
can't get a deal on X million, and it's gonna cost 120% more, 150% more, or 200% more.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It becomes a, cost benefit analysis for both parties ultimately.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, let's leave behind, the go live and let's talk about, moving into the, we know that there are some factors out there in the world around the legal requirements, our investor requirements, and our customers' requirements. If we are a generator, if we are a buyer, there are lots of people who are asking big questions now about the energy consumption practices of the business, right? So let's just assume we get that PPA live and we're in the mix now, right? We have an understanding, okay, we're getting this energy, things are good, we're energized. How do you effectively manage a PPA at that point, right? It's not just sign some papers and you're in a walk in a park and it's done. There's a lot to it, right? There's actually things that need to happen from your standpoint as the buyer, and there are people that you're going to be reporting back to. So talk us through what needs to happen on a PPA's, I would say operational life cycle stage.
Yeah, that's something we always tell our customers as well, and then the corporate set that we work with, we tell them PPAs aren't the agreements that you can just sign, put them in the drawer, and then forget about for the next 10 years. No, because they are high value transactions and then high value contracts, and it needs to be managed. So what do I mean by it needs to be managed? Because renewable projects are intermittent generators, and then on monthly basis, we would have a forecast of how much it could generate, but it never the case that it'll generate exactly the same amount that's generated as you expected. And also project goes offline as well because of various different reasons, sometimes because of the planned preventative maintenance, operation maintenance requirements, and so on. So you need to see how much the project is expected to generate and how much is generated, and then what's the price point that it delivered to you. If it is a physical PPA, so you know the price point, it always gets delivered to you at that price point. But if your output is lower, so meaning you won't get your energy at that agreed price point, but you have to get the residual amount from the grid, and then that's at a variable price. And typically it's actually higher price than the PPA. So you have a financial impact of that one. And then you expect a certain amount of guarantees of origin comes with that as well. And then that get hampered too. So in a way, you need to have a system on a month by month basis to see how your PPA performed against the contract. And there are, yeah,
And not even just month by month, right? In many ways, the month by month reporting is to get insights even at the hourly and daily level, right? Because that is the pushing regulatory burden these days, is to move towards more granular understanding. So even if you are reviewing things at a monthly basis, you still need to get down to the nitty gritty.
absolutely, absolutely. So this is the like a slight pitch of RE24. I mean, as as it
Hey,
says,
no, that's fine.
no, I mean, as it says in our background as well, it's so that hourly matching of element of that. And if you look at the data center sector, so they want to go to that carbon neutral data center pact, and then they want to meet 70% of hourly matching by 2027, and then 100% by 2030. So it needs to be measured and then verified. It needs to be evaluated. So yes, so it's not just monthly, it's actually coming down to that granular in that hourly level as well. And you need to have that full visibility, how your projects are performing.
And so when you're thinking about the project management, right, you had mentioned two main pillars, right? One, you're talking about a cost basis to understand what happens with the energy being supplied. In other words, are we hitting our targets, and what are the costs associated with that? And then there's the second side, which was the guarantees of origin, right? So you need to have both domains easily accessible and consolidated across possibly multiple portfolios, correct?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Um, and and in most cases, you when you're a buyer, you can aggregate all your renewable generation into a single place, and you can see how is my wind project doing, how is my solar project doing, how is my other wind project doing, and all of that. And then, so because that all can be fed into the single place, and you can have that overall view of it in a single place, which actually makes your life significantly easier because you have the holistic view of your renewable performance. It is. But just imagine if you don't have that holistic view, you need to go to that individual generator by generator and then see how those projects are doing, which is actually a pain because your core business is not PPA management. Your core business is you're a data center or you're a different sector. So that's your core business. So that's why it's really important to have that efficient management system, but also going to the guarantees of origin. Guarantees of origin angle as well. So they have their individual guarantees of origin accounts to the regulator. If it is in the UK, so you have Ofgem Rego accounts, and if it is in EU, so you have geo accounts, like so part of EU, so Ireland, OFC managed by SEMO, so the GREX have their accounts. Essentially, there are different accounts, and again, you need to have a single place where you can see the aggregated value and volumes of your guarantees of origin, and you can see the performance of it.
I was just imagining someone's job where they would literally be going spreadsheet by spreadsheet for maybe a turbine or for a solar, for a solar segment where they're saying, look, I've got this and this is the uptime and the downtime of the asset. And you're like, oh my gosh, some people have to look at this through manual Excel spreadsheets and they have to do it on multiple sites. Like that just seems like such a terribly painful journey to be going through.
Yeah, absolutely. So that if you get all the data, sometimes you don't get the data as well. Yeah. So the whole heap of challenges comes with that too. And we have
Okay, so
and
here it becomes a no-brainer. In other words, to find ways to pull that data from the asset level, even like maybe even down, like for instance, the turbine
into the
level,
turbine level. Yeah.
be able to see all that performance in one place. Otherwise, it just becomes a truly, you know, data, you know, data deckhand kind of situation where you're literally crunching numbers just to try to get a monthly report done, including guarantees of origin, including your cost analysis.
Absolutely. And we didn't even touch things like the availability, for example. So
Mm.
and then
So explain it.
yeah, and then again, contractually, you would have a certain availability criteria to meet. The seller has to meet certain availability criteria, and if the seller doesn't meet that availability criteria, so there'll be a compensation that the buyer could get because the seller hasn't met the availability, and there is a way of calculation how that's being calculated too. So again, if you do the manual process to measure availability and then get that calculation, it's an absolute nightmare. But
Mhm.
but also you need to have the full visibility of that availability too. Like if a certain turbine is offline, if you are a if you're a buyer, you should know why it's offline, and then all that data needs to be feed in as well.
Mhm.
And then because availability is one of the primary items in the PPA, you have things like the how much is that annual availability cap, like the liability cap, but also you'll have if the availability goes below certain level for number of consecutive years. So let's say for 2 consecutive years, if the availability goes below a certain level, and then the contract get terminated because of that lack of availability too. Because when you sign the PPA, parties agree, you sign the PPA on the whole merit of it's actually up and running for 10 years. You don't want to sign it's offline for 6 months and then it's doing nothing.
Yeah, you're locked in for another 10 years of underperformance.
Exactly right. So that's exactly why you need to have that data. You need to measure it, manage it, because otherwise what's going to happen is you sign this PPA of thinking it will deliver you like X million euros or pounds of savings in the year. And then when you look at the numbers at the year end, like hang on, so the numbers like is significantly lower or it
Mhm.
doesn't stack up anywhere near what you thought. And you
Mhm.
need to you need to know what had happened. So it could be the output is reduced or the availability is low. And the only way to get that level insight is that by measuring and by monitoring that project.
Live analytics on a PPA. So,
Absolutely.
in short, right, the PPA, yes, there's lots of precautions you can take when you're getting up to it. But once you're in the game and you have a PPA live, it really kind of comes down to being intelligent about how you get your data and how you use it. Because otherwise, it's useless, right? You've just committed to a piece of paper that ultimately may or may not make you savings. And if you're not paying attention to it, you won't be able to identify it and you won't even be able to shout about it, right? Because ultimately, this is supposed to be a win for all parties. You're supposed to be saving money with your PPA, which you can do. You're supposed to be able to talk about your green credentials, which you are now able to say, look, these are the actual guarantees of origins and the certificates saying
Absolutely. Yeah.
we've done this, right, to go to the next level of our net zero journey.
Yeah. Correct. Yes.
Yeah, nothing.
Yeah. Yeah. But at the same time, like any of that, like when we say about those things, it shouldn't like put somebody off. Like if you're a
Yeah,
buyer,
exactly.
it shouldn't put you off because we are not saying that, oh my God, it's an absolutely nightmare to manage it. No, we're not saying that. We are all what you're saying is that it needs to be managed because if you don't manage it, if you do not monitor it, it's gonna bite you at a later stage. So that's why that precaution is important and actually like having that visibility for you, for your customers, it's significantly important because then you can really realize the good thing that you're doing.
Yeah. So ultimately, it comes down to having good tools on hand to manage the game more effectively.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah.
Very cool. Well, I think those are the big things that have been on my mind when it comes to this. I mean, Dan, do you have any other final thoughts that you want to leave with people, about the rubber meeting the road, the practicalities of this, and how we go further on this journey, hopefully saving money, making the planet a little bit more green, and making our business a little bit more I'd say positively contributing to society.
Yeah, maybe just one more thing on the finance angle as well, because
Yeah,
because
go for
those because those things are like financial transactions. It's energy, but it's a lot of money flowing in both sides. And on every month, then you have that invoices comes from your PPA and then all that related items, and it's important for you to have that verification or the validation of those bills. So in a way, when we say validation, is like you can't blindly see an invoice and then approve 2 million, 3 million euros or pounds on that invoice, because there has to be a based on that and then the justification about it. So again, the very point that we discussed earlier, that all that the data analytics, they are the source for that invoicing. And then so it's really important that we like when you execute a PPA, you have all checks and balances to do that validation of your monthly invoices. And it's not just for your sake, like eventually you'll be going through that audits as well. And then when your auditors raise questions, you need to be armed with the response. And obviously, first you need to do like we all need to do the right thing, and we all would like to do the right thing. So all the checks and balances we need to do, but at the same time, we need to have that audit trail of how things come in the surface on every month, and we need to make sure that's actually right, accurate, and then we can proceed the transaction monthly based on that plan.
So you're saying essentially all this is built on trust. And when we have the data and the tools available to make that work, one, we strengthen our relationship with the generators, we make it easier for our auditors. We probably excite our investors a little bit because they know how we're being diligent about our financials. They understand how we're being diligent about our spending. And ultimately, it's a win for everybody.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. So managing a PPA is actually really good fun. You need to have all the tools available for you, and it's amazing to go through that journey. It's
Yeah.
rewarding, definitely.
Spoken like a true energy industry professional there, sir.
But it's good. It's good. Yes.
Very good. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for listening to this conversation as we've gone through our webinars. Has been the third one, and honestly, it has kind of flown by, and I have learned an incredible amount, Dan. So thank you for allowing me to be part of this conversation. Thank you for educating me and the squad out there. I hope that all of you have a great day, and yeah, I hope you build on this knowledge. And if you ever have any questions or anything that we can do, reach out to us separately, reach out to Dan, reach out to myself. We'd love to connect you to more brilliant people doing amazing things in energy and net zero. Dan,
Fantastic.
any
Thanks.
final
Thanks.
thoughts?
Yeah. Thanks, Andrew. Thank you very much for wonderful facilitation there. Fantastic, wonderful moderation. And actually, I love your background. It's amazing. It's cool.
I'm calling you from Sunset, San Francisco, although that
Absolutely.
is not correct.
Like, absolutely. Love it.
Alrighty, have a good one. Thanks, guys.
Right.
Bye.
Thanks all. Bye.